Balto, the Dog That Saved a Town. Chapter 1: The Call of the Blizzard. Alaska in the 1920s was a place of extremes. The winters were long and merciless, and the wilderness stretched endless and unforgiving. Nome, a small town tucked against the Bering Sea, was no stranger to hardship. Its people were strong, built from years of battling ice storms and isolation. But in January of 1925, the town faced a threat greater than snow or frostbite. Diphtheria had come, a sickness that spread fast and suffocated its victims, and the only serum that could stop it lay hundreds of miles away in Anchorage. The town's Dr. Curtis Welch stood grimly at his window one evening watching the snow whip across the empty streets. He had already lost several children and more were falling ill every day. The telegraph lines carried his desperate plea: serum needed urgently, stop. Without it, many deaths, stop. But how could the medicine reach them? Trains ran only as far as Nenana, still nearly 700 miles from Nome. The harbor was frozen solid, blocking ships. Airplanes were too fragile, grounded by the brutal Arctic weather. The only option left was one that harkened back to Alaska's oldest lifeline: dog sleds. A plan formed. Teams of mushers and their dogs would carry the serum in a relay across the wilderness, each man driving as far as he dared before handing it off to the next. It would be a race not for glory but for life itself, a battle against time and blizzard. Among the many mushers called upon was Gunnar Kaasen, a quiet, sturdy man who worked for the kennel of the famous musher Leonhard Seppala. Seppala was regarded as the finest dog driver in the region, but Kaasen, though less well known, had proven himself dependable. When Kaasen was chosen to drive one of the final, most dangerous legs of the relay, he knew the responsibility would test him and his dogs to the limit. At the front of his team stood a black-and-white husky with piercing amber eyes, Balto. He was not considered the best dog in Seppala's kennels. Others were swifter, sleeker, and more celebrated, but Kaasen had worked with Balto often and he knew the dog's strength. Balto had stamina, courage, and above all, a heart that refused to quit. On January 27th, the relay began. From Nenana, the serum was packed carefully into a small cylinder, wrapped in fur and oilskin to protect it from freezing. The first team lunged into the storm, sled runners shrieking against ice, dogs panting steam into the night. Hand over hand, musher over musher, the serum moved across the frozen land, through forests, over rivers, across tundra beaten flat by wind. The temperature plunged to 60 below zero. Men lost feeling in their hands, frost crept into their bones, but still they drove onward. In Nome, parents sat beside their children, listening to the ragged breaths, praying for the sound of dogs and runners outside their doors. When the serum finally reached Kaasen's hands, the blizzard had grown into a monster. Snow fell so thick that the world shrank to a blur of white. Winds screamed like banshees, tearing at clothing and sleds. Kaasen squinted, but he could hardly see the trail. He knew that one wrong turn could mean disaster, yet when he called out to his team, it was Balto who lifted his head, nose cutting through the storm, ears pricked forward as if he could smell the way. With Kaasen shouting encouragement, the dogs plunged into the whiteout, Balto leading them straight into the teeth of the storm. Chapter 2: The Dog That Saved a Town. For hours they battled the storm. Ice tore at Kaasen's face until he could no longer feel his skin. Snow crusted the dog's fur, freezing into white armor. The wind shoved at them like an invisible hand, threatening to push the sled off course. Kaasen leaned into the runners, his hands raw inside frozen mitts, but still the team surged forward, Balto driving at the front with a determination that seemed almost human. At one point, the sled tipped dangerously as they crossed a frozen river. The ice cracked beneath them, water sloshing up in black, freezing waves. Kaasen's breath caught. If the serum fell in, all would be lost. But Balto pulled the team harder, straining every muscle until they found firm ground again. The cylinder, still strapped to the sled, remained safe. Kaasen whispered hoarsely into the storm, "Good boy, Balto, keep going." On they ran, through the night, the only light the faint glow of the aurora shimmering green and purple above the blizzard's fury. Hours bled into each other. Kaasen's eyelids froze shut more than once and he had to pry them open with his fingers. Yet whenever he faltered, Balto pressed on, guiding the team as though the storm itself could not sway him. Finally, as dawn broke on January 31st, Nome came into view, just a scatter of lights in the distance, blurred by snow. The dogs stumbled forward, paws bleeding, tongues lolling. And at the front, Balto still ran, his chest heaving, his fur heavy with ice but his eyes blazing with purpose. At 5:30 a.m., Kaasen and his team staggered into Nome. The townsfolk rushed from their homes, cheers and tears mixing in the freezing air. The serum was safe. The children would live. Balto stood panting in the snow, unaware of the history he had made. To him, it was simply another run, another duty fulfilled. But to the people of Nome and soon the world, he was a hero. News spread quickly. Newspapers across America carried the story, "Dog saves children of Nome." Crowds gathered in cities to cheer Balto's name. A statue was erected in Central Park, New York, honoring not only him but all the sled dogs of the Serum Run. Its inscription reads, "Endurance, Fidelity, Intelligence." Balto lived out his days far from the blizzards of Alaska, but his spirit remained tied to that frozen night when courage carried him through a storm. He had not been the fastest nor the finest, but when the lives of children depended on him, he proved that the strength of a true heart can change the fate of an entire town. And so Balto became more than a dog. He became a legend, a reminder that heroes are not measured by glory or fame, but by the moments when they refuse to stop running no matter how fierce the storm.